Hello, Michael here again for the final in the clouds tutorial series. And I'm sure you are like me, sick of clouds. No, I'm not really, but I'll be happy to move on to something new. So this week we're going to be talking about scenes that are involving clouds in the sky, your big landscape sort of shots where you've got, wide angles of large billowy clouds in the sky, and how you might approach setting up a scene like that. I'm going to do it pretty stripped back because unfortunately rendering clouds takes a very long time. And this video would go for years if I was to show you every single way of doing it. So I'm going to use a pretty straightforward way of doing it, just using a fluids container and some examples from Visor. So yeah, let's get straight into it. I've got a scene set up. It's fresh, just saved as a new scene in my projects file. We're going to go to the drop down bar here and we're going to click effects, and then we're going to go to fluids, and then we're going to go to get example fluid, and the visor is going to come up. So in the top tabs here, you want to go to fluid examples and you want to go to clouds and fog, and then you'll get roughly a dozen examples here, and you're going to want to import one of them. And which one you go for sort of depends on what your scene is. You can see in the the thumbnails sort of what you're roughly going to get. We're going to make some alterations to these anyway, so don't get too fussy with them. But the first one I'm going to start with is the time-lapse cloud, and I'm going to use this one for as if the camera was underneath looking up at the clouds. So if you just right click on that and import file template into Maya, you'll see that you get something that looks like this. So I'm going to turn the grid off because we do not need it. So a couple of things. Similar to with the other tutorial, when you are blocking out your clouds, you want to pull your camera back because it will make your render times a lot quicker just to start with. When you import one of these examples, you get a few things that you don't need. This directional light, it's not a Renderman light, so it won't do anything. This camera here, we don't really need it, so we're going to delete it. Generally, I kill the haze, but I'm going to do a quick render and show you what it does in fact look like. I'm just going to turn the gate on there so I know what I'm rendering. So I'll pull the camera underneath here and we'll do an IPR render and have a look. Okay, so for your big cloud scenes, this is actually probably going to look quite good if you're looking for like a nice sparsely clouded sky. This is pretty much going to sell it, I think. What we're going to need to do is put some lights on in the scene though. Obviously we've just got the global light, the default Renderman global light set up, which is fine if you're just blocking out. Actually, it's probably a good way to do it. You can also use an environment light or the other one that simulates the sun, which is also fine. But it really depends on what your scene is as to which sort of lighting scenario you're going to use. And I will point out that your environment lights will really increase your render time as well. Even putting a single light on this is going to increase the render time. So let's do that and increase the render time, shall we? So I'm just going to use a standard geolight. I'm going to move it up. Actually, I'm just going to go to the other view so I can see where it is. There it is. I'm going to turn it to face the camera and point it sort of across. Actually, I want it facing the other way. That way. Very rough. And put it a little bit higher and move it across this way. Now this light's going to have to be quite bright, so we're going to change the exposure to be 15, and we're going to change the color to be sun color, which is usually quite peachy. And then we're going to select this window and we're going to do an IPR again. I did not, oh no, there we go. I just want to pull the camera down a little bit. Okay, so, it's starting to look a little bit more realistic. Let's look at a couple of the color options as to that affect how it renders out. So in the, if you select your clouds and in the attribute editor, if you scroll down, you'll get coloring and incandescence and opacity. And these are the three things that we're going to look at, which are going to affect the way our clouds look the most. First thing, color. This is just the base color of your cloud. It's sort of like a desaturated gray, which is sort of what you'd expect a cloud to look like. You might want to push it to be a little bit more white if you're finding that your renders are coming up a little bit desaturated or dull looking. I'm actually going to make sure that I go to View, Image Color Space, and turn on sRGB, because that will give us a more realistic render. So yeah, as you can see, it's a little bit dull. So I'm going to pull that a bit whiter. Secondly, incandescent. So the cloud is actually emitting a color as well, and that's controlled by the incandescence. And this is really useful for your opposite size to your light. So you can see that the cloud is being lit by your primary light source, and then the offside is turning blue. And some real basic color theory is that basically your light side of anything that's being illuminated, if it's being illuminated by a warm colored light, your shadow side is going to be a cool color. So we've got an orange light, which is a hot color. We're going to get a cool shadow, which is blue. So you can adjust the color of your shadow side using the incandescence. And then I just basically keep it at the default generally and play around with it. If I want it to be a little bit less blue, maybe I might pull it back to be sort of push it more gray. But generally I think that's quite a nice color choice, and then you can affect it using your direct light. So that's pretty much all you really need to know so far as like getting a sky going. The clouds do tend to look a little bit flat just by default. You can adjust a few things. I'll go into that in a second. One other thing to keep in mind is obviously the size of it. It looks small in this because it's relative to nothing. It does look small. If I put some mountains in here and blow it up to be the same size as the frame, it would look a lot bigger. So if I pull the camera in here, the real trick is getting this to be completely filling the frame, and then I can go up to size, and let's make it 100 by 2 by 100. That's going to fill the frame, and I'll do the same with the haze, 100 by 5, 100, and then do a render and you'll see what it looks like. So yeah, as you can see, it's starting to look like a sky full of clouds, and you've got a little bit more of a vanishing point occurring because you're getting smaller into the distance. Obviously the sky is black, which is weird because the sky isn't black when you've got a light source in the sky that is not that's the sun. So if we want to make that look just really quickly a little bit more realistic, we can bring in an environment light, and then we can change the procedural color to be a ramp, and let's make it a sunset because they're always the most fun. Get a red, get a orange, and get a blue. One thing I find that with the shaders for the environment light is that they always come out a bit more saturated in the render. So with your selector color, particularly for the blue, I like to really desaturate it, and the sunset colors, it doesn't really matter if they're a bit saturated because that's how a sunset looks. So let's hit render and see what happens. Okay, so yeah, that's roughly correct. The sunset's a little bit crazy, and that red's probably way too high in the sky. I'd probably pull it back to roughly there to get it correct. And the other thing is our light source is probably a little bit too close to the clouds. Because it's sunset, obviously you'd want to put it closer to the horizon, but that's fine. This is just an example, so I just wanted to show you what it would look like roughly. So that's sort of how you might want to consider filling a sky with clouds. And remember, the clouds are always going to look bigger if you've got something relative that a person will understand what it looks like. So if you put a human being in the scene, the clouds are going to look really big if you put a really small person in it. Also, obviously, they're going to look really little if you put a big person in it. So that's something to consider when you're setting up your shots. All right. So let's move on to big old clouds. So I'm going to delete those from the scene, and I'm going to get rid of our environment light, and then we're going to go back to the visor. We're going to choose afternoon clouds and port that into Maya. and then you get this. This one's actually kind of cool. If you have a shot where you're sort of looking over the earth, I'll show you what it looks like, the render. It gives you some atmosphere, so that's actually, if you're looking to do that sort of very specific shot, that might actually be useful for you. But what I'm going to do is delete the fog because I don't want it. And this shot, we're going to approach it as if we are perpendicular to the clouds in the sky. So as if you were looking out the window of an aeroplane or you're flying, like that scene in Big Hero 6 or something like that. We're going to make it look like the clouds are really large and we're right next to them. So with the container selected, we're going to change our color, our base color to be more white. We're going to keep the incandescence as it is. And then we're going to change the size to be square. So it's going to be 20 by 20 by 12. Make that a little bit less, maybe 16. Yeah. And the resolution, because I've increased that, I'm going to increase that to be 12. And then I'm going to pull the camera back. I'm going to move that light so it's not stuck inside the cloud. I'm just going to check it's facing the right way, and it's on top of the clouds. It is. Pull the camera back because, like I said, these renders take a long time. And then let's do an IPR. Okay, so we've got a really dense bit of cloud happening with some nice tops, and obviously the closer you get to these clouds, the bigger they're going to appear. Like the perception is that they're going to appear to be bigger. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually increase that to be 17, and render that one and see if we're getting a little bit closer. Yeah, that's a little bit closer to what I want. I'm going to pull that light around a bit more to the far side so we're getting some cast shadows as well. So I'm going to create a fresh light and I'm going to move it up, and I'm going to change a few things. It's going to be a disk. It is going to be 17 in exposure. It is going to be a peach color. And we're going to get it to face the clouds. Should be that direction. Yep, and we're going to move it and we're going to turn it that direction. Pull out and do a render and see what happens. Okay, so getting there, not quite what I'm after. If I lower it in the sky, we'll get some better cast shadows possibly. See what that looks like. Yeah, it's a bit better. And I think it might be a bit hot, so let's turn it down to be 16. Because what I'm really looking for is some depth in our shot. So the better the cast shadows, the more realistic it's going to look. And if I put it a bit more there, it might have a better effect. Okay, so that's sort of what I'm looking for. So I'm going to put an environment light in, and I'm just going to make it blue, and then we're going to hit render and see what that looks like. Okay, so that's probably going to get us close to what I want. I'm actually going to change that to be a ramp as well, and it's going to be at the sky top, it's going to be dark, because generally you'll find that the sky is darker in the middle at the top, and then it's sort of lighter towards the horizon. Sorry, it's lighter closer to where the sun is. So let's say that the sun is a little bit lower in the sky, and let's do a render and see what that looks like. Cool, so it's getting a bit darker on that side there, obviously, because the light's not getting there. So what we want to do is, I'm just going to move that there, pull our camera in, and I want to make sure that the camera is getting nice and close, so that helps. If you look from the top view, select the perspective, and give it a render. Okay, so with our environment light on there, you'll see that it's just a little bit too bright overall. So we're going to adjust our area light to be 14, and our environment light, I'm actually going to change that ramp so it's reversed for starters. And then I want, because it's still being illuminated from underneath, we're going to put another color in, and it's still going to be quite saturated and quite dark. So we should get some nice bounce light happening there. Do a quick zoomed out render just to check it. Yeah, that's improved it a bit. Pull that light in a bit closer. Actually, maybe just boost it in exposure. Okay, so we're going to change 2 more things and we'll do our final. So we're going to go to the ramp again, and we're going to pull this down so we're actually getting more of that gradient effect. And then we're going to go to our light, 16. Check that. That's better. So I'm going to zoom in on the center area here so we get a nice transition from that light side to that dark side. Still a bit bright, real close. I'm going to move that light. Okay, now we're getting much better contrast. So just reduce the exposure and increase the saturation of that light, and pulled it down a little bit, so it's sort of coming a little bit more side on, so we're getting like a more afternoony sort of lighting effect. And then we're going to pull our camera in. So the part I liked was roughly cut in here, so we're just going to sort of focus on that. The top of the clouds in this box in the visualizer isn't always accurate to where you'll find the topmost part of your cloud, or it won't actually appear as dense in the render as it sort of appears obviously in here. So you're probably generally going to be a little bit lower than what you see. So sort of there, pull our camera in, select that correct window, and then render. All right, just while that's rendering, so we are getting a lot better cast shadows coming across here. The contrast is probably not as high as I'd like it, but that's generally, I'd say, due to our environment light being quite a bright color. So I'd probably pull that back for the final of this. But we are getting the shapes that we want from the clouds, from the fluid solver. So this is sort of basically how you might want to approach this. There is one other way you can do this with Photoshop. Instead of using an environment shader, just export this, go to File, Export File out as a PNG. If you don't have an environment light on, if you don't have anything in the background, it will be transparent, and just the clouds, any physical object in the scene will just be rendered, and it'll keep the background transparent. And I'll show you how you can sort of fill that in Photoshop here. This is one that I worked on off video. So you can see those gray and white squares. Basically what that means in Photoshop is that it's just transparent. So you could put something behind this and you're going to be able to see it. For example, as you can see. So I can paint in behind the clouds that I've already rendered, and this could actually end up saving you quite a bit of render time, instead of using like an environment light or a big square something rather a certain color. You could actually just do it in post in Photoshop, if that's going to work for your particular workflow. If you're doing a still particularly, if you're doing an animation, this might not work so well. But yeah, the way I like to do it is, what I do is I grab the fill brush by hitting G, or it's this guy here if you hold and click, and gradient fill, and then I select the on the drop down, that one there, which is transitions from one color to another, and then this left one is in a linear fill. And then with colors, I'll make one of them a bluish color, and then the next a more desaturated but roughly the same value blue. And then if you just click and drag, if you hold shift, you'll be able to move that up in the cardinal directions, and then you get something that looks like that. So it's pretty straightforward to do. Then you might just want to go into your cloud layer, maybe go to, if it's a bit noisy, you can go to reduce noise, and then compare the difference, and that just by the default looks pretty good. And then finally we go and do an adjustment on the levels. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So yeah, I just want to show you that quick tip as well. Alright, so just while this is rendering out our final image, I'll just quickly wrap this one up. So what I've done here is I've gone to Renderman controls, and I've just changed the image size to be 480 by 270, so a much lower resolution. And I've also gone to sampling. I might just stop this render because it's just murdering my computer, but I just want to make sure that you sort of see the difference. That's probably close enough. Not sure how far into the render that got. Let's have a look. Yeah, 3 minutes in, so probably not all the way, but it gives you a bit of an example of the difference. So this is HD 540 and this is 480 by 270 versus 960 by 540, so just half the resolution. It's the same shot, but you can see that it's quite a bit better looking because I've rendered it a bit further. And just went to the loo while it was doing that. So what you want to do for your finals, I should mention, is if you go into your Renderman controls, which is just this button here, go to sampling, and then we'll go down to denoise. And if you turn on frame denoise, you will get a much smoother looking render overall. It's something you might want to consider doing for all your renders, just pending sort of some experimentation. But yeah, this is just, I've just said that it's 512 samples, and you get a pretty good looking sky, cloudy thing happening. It's not too noisy, as you can see. It's not, obviously the render wasn't completed, so it's not perfect, but I think that looks pretty good. And as you can see, it's pretty much given me the result I wanted for the clouds. If we compare that with that, unfortunately, it's just sorry, it's such a low resolution, but man, these things take ages to render. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of that tutorial and the end of the series. I hope you've liked it. I hope you've found some useful tips while I've gone through all these different ways of doing it. There are a million different ways of doing clouds and rendering them and creating clouds using influids, and you can do them from scratch as well. I didn't really want to get into that here because that's a whole thing in itself, but using the visors you can whip something up quite quickly. It's sort of a little bit cheaty, but art is all about cheating, and that's what we're doing here. We're doing art, so if you can save time, absolutely go for it. So yeah, but if you've liked the video, please click like, I'd really appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I do lots of Renderman tutorials, and if that's what you're into, you're going to get a whole lot more in the future. So next week I'll be doing a different tutorial. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to be doing yet, but you'll find out next Friday or Saturday roughly when I put it up. Yeah, so if you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do that. And if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments, or if you've got any requests for tutorials, leave them in the comments as well. I'd be happy to have a look into doing one for you. But yeah, until next time, hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and happy rendering.